Welcome to a panel discussion here at the festival at the Angewandte, the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Here we are, and I thought that apropos to the festival and to the Angewandte, it would be good to invite some alumni from the program, from Studio Hani Rashid, from the studio that I've taught with my assistants over the last few years. We have today, are being joined by five terrific architects, young architects, who are all at different stages in their early careers, having graduated in the last, basically since 2012, I guess, is the veteran amongst the group here with Johan and Sille. And so I think we're going to start the discussion right away. I just want to say one thing, and that's that you know, the program that I have headed up and that we've been working with over the years has been one of really not so much teaching hardcore methodologies or sort of formulaic way of teaching architecture or architectural design, but rather a kind of open-ended discussion on theory, practice, and experimentation. And the goal has always been to equip architects with, you know, the tools, the arsenal, the sort of facility and the kind of talent sets that are needed to work in this discipline at different levels. What's interesting about this group today is the varied interests, the varied approaches. They each have their own track. They're each looking at architecture from a very different point of view, which I find fascinating. And they're basically making headway in the field according to their own trajectories and their own sort of path. So let's just start. We're going to be having brief presentations from each of the five. We'll take questions and answers afterwards, if you have any, and feel free to just weigh in. And first, I think on deck is Ewa Lenart. Ewa graduated in 2016 from the program. She's already become sort of very interesting and has a wide international experience and a really big interest in foreign cultures and working in various situations and in diverse environments. At the moment, she's immersed in a dynamic and unique building industry in the UK, especially in the context of retrieving heritage values within the built environment and the creative response to reuse and land reuse and building reuse and infrastructure. Ewa is today, and as she was as a student, extremely proactive, very charismatic, and is involved in several industry-based organizations and various academic institutions, developing an expertise on teaching methodologies and the roles of governance in our discipline.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much, Hani, all the assistants, and Angewandte Festival for having me. It's actually the great pleasure to reconnect with my alumni friends and also virtually to connect to all the current Angewandte and Studio Rashid students. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I prepared a couple of slides. As I understand that the premise of today's talk, it's really to reflect upon last couple of years of our times post-graduation and where our personal trajectories took us. However, I feel it's quite necessary, if not crucial, to start off with outlining at my time at the Angewandte, as I strongly believe that a lot of ideas and connections with people were established there, and the seed was planted. And I see it, and as a really strong base to where I got to where I really aspire to go in the future. So to those of you who don't know me, my name is Eva Leonard. As Hani mentioned, I'm an architect based in London. I have over 7 years of experience, predominantly in cultural sector. I'm currently involved in some of the biggest major regeneration schemes in London. However, my background, I have quite an extensive background in exhibition design, industrial design, and a smaller scale interventions. I'm originally Polish, and I was one of those kids who joined Angewandte straight after my A-levels, and it was 11 years ago. And I was part of the last cohort of diploma studies where architecture program was run, bachelor and master's combined for 5 years. And my first year, I did my entry exam with Wolf Prix of Comp Blau, And then in 2011, I believe, Hani joined Angewandte. And ever since, I was part of the studio and did only semester out, I think, with greifen. So I would like to start off with my thesis, which I can't believe has been already 5.5 years ago. So I graduated from Studio Hani Rashid in 2016, January. And my thesis was really investigating a post-colonial African metropolis condition, proposing institutional building in Ethiopia. Was looking into developing isolated geometry, which could host both public and private institutions, analyzing native African pattern making and rhythmic interpretation, and proposing new paradigms for contemporary urban condition on African continent. Curiosity is the last of the mind. And frankly, this is the quote I started my diploma with. And for me, it has quite deep meaning in the way that often in the midst of doing something, we cannot see sometimes continuation of our design process. But once you zoom out, you are able to connect the dots. And usually the things that your intuition that drives you towards the right things for you, it's, I think, your curiosity. And definitely throughout my time at the Angewandte, it was really sparked, and I was able to experiment and work in so many different studios and so many different sizes and scales. And I think it's quite important for me to mention this project, as I think it was quite fundamental for me. Throughout my time at the Angewandte, parallel to Rashid Studio, for 2 years, I've been going back and forth to Accra, to Ghana, as we were realizing this pavilion on the Pacific Ocean with Bärbel Müller of Applied Foreign Affairs. And this project been actually quite widely published and recognized in many shapes and forms. And what it taught me is obviously most importantly looking at the local political social context, but also about the difficulties of realizing projects, and also BD, business development, and the idea how you should market and talk about the project, as we as a group of students were responsible for this. And this also sparked for me the interest in African continent, which I was able to bring it to Studio Rashid through my thesis. And in 2014, I also had the chance to spend a year out at the SCIARC, as we have very strong link with the university, and it's absolutely brilliant institution. And I had an amazing time. And it was really also interesting to see similarities and differences between Angewandte and SCIARC. And I think we have such a beautiful connection with this institution. And on some levels, so far away on the globe, there's so much in common. And what's really important to me that throughout my time at the studio, at the Angewandte, I was able to, I think, establish a lot of really interesting relationships, which gave me the opportunities to every year work for different firms, mostly in Vienna, but also in various places. Throughout my time in Ghana, I got engaged with David Ajay. And that time in 2013-14, the office still wasn't that extremely well known as it's now. And I've been working on a couple of really fantastic projects for them on African continent. At the same time, I work in Vienna for Delugan Meisel or Barbara Imhoff on such a small scale as like NASA prototypes. Or I've collaborated with a lot of projects for Eva Schlegel, artist, a fantastic artist in Vienna. And what I try to draw here, that at the time of meeting the people that I ended up working for, I don't think so at that time I had a strong agenda or idea where I want to get in the future. But all of those collaborations, works had in common is that I always met the person who I looked up to, who had great energy, and I really wanted to work for them. And this gave me an opportunity to work on really different scales from small to big, and establish relationships with people, which later in life, they often tend to come back in different shape and form. And in 2016, upon my graduation, I've actually been contacted by a colleague, alumni from Studio Rashid, who graduated before me. asking whether I would like to join the team of Austrian team for the pavilion at the Biennale. And obviously this was absolutely a brilliant opportunity, and I joined straight a few weeks after my diploma. And again, talking about relationships, it was really interesting that the office I used to work for, Delug and Meisel, were also involved. And so this shows this really interesting and open collaborative culture in design field. And I've spent some time working for the Next Enterprise, where I've been giving a really exciting chance to develop my aesthetic visual language and experience working in the Great Architecture Office. In 2017, a year after diploma, I've been very lucky. I've been granted teacher scholarship granted by Minister of Culture in Austria for young Austrian architects. And I went to London. And I started to work, I returned to work for Sir David Adjaye, as I've engaged into the projects throughout my studies. And in this time, 2017, I think it was a super exciting time, as all of the projects actually, which were landing in the office, were all on its own merit, absolutely fantastic, as obviously David Adjaye is really recognized for his civic work. And I was very lucky to be part of design team. And I also found all the skill set which I acquired throughout the time at the Angewandte extremely valuable, because I think sometimes it's hard to realize at the time when you are at the studio, we are so fluent and proficient in design language, design, understanding people's requirements and turning into shapes and forms. So it was quite fluent transition for me. And I've had a chance to work on these three very special civic projects, one in Australia, one in Ghana, and one in London. And London project had a big breakthrough for me in the sense that I was going from design stages to planning. And I got honestly a lot of realization how complex it often is to turn your vision into existing context of all the regulatory frameworks and the planning constraints we often come across. And I came across a lot of Excel sheets and clients' expectations. And I think my first reaction was, I'm not really interested in this part of development. But really quickly, my curiosity kicked in. And I tried to think why some projects are successful than others. And for me, it's all about meaningful relationships, which are usually sustained by understanding other people's priorities. And I was very curious to deepen this knowledge of developing projects in the construction industry. Following this interest, I decided to do a postgraduate program, an architecture diploma in professional practice, which prepares you for qualifications and give you quite an in-depth understanding of business management in architecture, legal and management side. And I chose University of Cambridge, which have really great program for it. And so for a year parallel to my work, I've been involved in this extra education, which I think gave me a lot of really valuable lessons. So very quickly, working on projects in London, I realized they are really three variables in any built environment project, which is cost, time, and quality. And to be fair, it's really hard to achieve three of them. Usually one has to give. So I like to say, like in any other relationship, value alignment is key. And it's and very often we as architects, as I try to think we are guardians of quality, naturally we much focus on this aspect of the project. However, unluckily, there's often conflict of interest, and many clients and stakeholders, and especially in public civic projects, the client body is quite complex, would rather prioritize time and budget. So for me, it's a lot about collaboration. And I think as much as you can understand other designers, it's very important to be able to understand your client in order to leverage your value. And I'd like to think about these three things while working. that people are wired differently, that it takes old types. What I mean by this, that optimists often solve the problems, but pessimists detect them early on. And evolution is tough to see up close. And then throughout my qualification, I really had a strong interest and eager to work on realization projects in the city of London. And I joined one of the biggest and largest British firms called Purcell. And I'm involved personally in the large-scale regenerations and adaptive reuse projects. And what it means often in London, in the existing context, they are questions of heritage, what can be retained, what can be extended. And we work on really big scale projects. And our current London portfolio includes National Portrait Gallery, National Gallery, Battersea Power Station, or V&A Museum. And apart from my architectural role, I'm also a trustee director on the trust, on the company's trust, which holds 70% of company's shares. And I think this role in the last 2 years gave me a lot of opportunity for training on leadership, financial, legal, and market awareness, which I find very valuable. And I try to also use my time to be extremely proactive in the built environment organizations to understand the wider context and understanding that there's so many sectors within built environment which have an influence on the industry. I'm also quite passionate about strengthening the link between academia and practice. And I'm hosting a series of events here in London in my office, where I invite people from built environments and to exchange thoughts with leading academic institutions. And recently we had guests from Bartlett, ETH in Zurich, or MIT. Unfortunately, I'm working on super exciting, really large scale projects in London, but unfortunately till end of the year it won't be released as it's extremely confidential. However, I wanted to share this project, which is also special for me, as a development of National Portrait Gallery with Jamie Forbes in London. And I would like to end it with like the set of value I believe that was really seated to all of us throughout the time at Angewandte, and thinking that one of the most valuable traits to possess is having a growth mindset, which can be described as having a desire to constantly improve oneself, expand one's horizon, and surround yourself with inspiring and like-minded people. And I think this is a trait which requires a lot of work and constant self-evaluation, and no matter what pathway you take. And yeah, thank you.
Ewa, that was fascinating. And I wanted to ask you a quick question before we move on to the next one. Basically, it seems to me that if I recall correctly, your work with us, and I remember, all the hard time you gave me as a student, in terms of pushing the envelope on, I would say on the kind of metaphysics and the sort of poetics of space making, right? You were very, very passionate about that. And I find it really interesting that you've harnessed that kind of conceptual, let's say, behavior and that conceptual interest into policy and professional practice. It's kind of an amazing leap to make, but a very apropos one, because it looks to me like, especially watching your presentation now and watching your career from where I watch it from, that you're trying to move the needle in terms of the way people interact and work with each other to understand benefits, to understand how things can become better on every level. Is that really, that's really what you're up to in a way, right? You're very interested in sort of, I don't want to use the same esoteric words we used when you were a student, but I think you are very interested in kind of getting under the hood of the way professional practice works and tweaking it from that. And I find that coming from a student who was so conceptual and fascinating to actually be moving into that world in a certain way that's really powerful. Is there something you want to add to that? I mean, is that really, do you feel these kind of empowerment of being able to work like that? Is that something you tap once in a while?
It's an interesting question, and sometimes I reflect myself and try to think like how my career developed. I think maybe it's also UK-based industry, but most of the projects, how they are procured through the procurement method, they are very divided in the way you deliver them. In the traditional sense, how we call it traditional procurement, there's only just a few % of projects which are delivered that way. So the industry, unluckily, it turned into the direction that they are design architects, concept architects, and delivery side. If I like it, probably no architects like it, but this is the reality. And what I try to show that through, I worked always really conceptually and always on very early stages. And for me, this last project working for David was a big eye opener. And it was for me very crucial to get qualified in the UK. And this is the delivery side you have to expose to. I'm definitely now in the point where I would like to merge those two words. So for me, it was a chapter. I would treat it as a chapter of really understanding the industry, how it works, and trying to bring those two words together. And to be really fair, personally, I'm super interested in prop tech and com tech, like property technology, construction technology. And there is so many really interesting startup companies happening right now in London, as I think that this is also the platform where you can bring a lot of your design thinking in a very different form and shape with understanding how industry ticks. As sometimes, like, there's this question, why do we enter architecture? I think most of us enter to architecture because we want to change the environment around us, right? And sometimes I think we can get stuck working in the profession because, as you know yourself, to get projects realized, it's just so unbelievably hard. And sometimes to go in different direction is a chapter, and you can then reflect upon.
Yeah, no, and I applaud you. I mean, it's amazing because I've always said that, you know, we educate architects to design well. We educate architects to think spatially, to question, you know, every aspect of spatiality. But actually getting into the world of making policy, making rules, adjusting rules, understanding the belly of the beast is amazingly important. And it's great that, you know, able to get into that world, to use your intelligence and your acumen and your talent to actually educate on the client side and on the building side and on the city side. So thank you. We'll get back to you at the end, perhaps with more questions, I hope. And we will now, I think, Johan, again, I'm going to try and quasi-read your without crashing. Johan's graduated from my first class actually back in 2012, so he was part of the transition when I came to the Angewandte. And prior to us, he studied at the Estonian Academy of Arts Department of Architecture, and in 2016 became a PhD candidate at his undergraduate alma mater. His research is currently focused on architectural exhibitions and how large-scale environments can be exhibited and perceived in public space. Since graduating from our program, Johan has worked with a great friend of mine, Thomas Sarasano, the great artist, as well as with Graft Architects. And in 2015, Johan collaborated with the Estonian architect Karli Luik, working on some very successful competition entries, such as the South Parish Center and the Kalev National Stadium. In 2017, he formed a joint architectural practice called Malumba, and has won prizes in over 30 competitions. After graduating in 2014, he co-curated and co-designed the Estonian exhibition Interspace at the 14th Biennale in Venice, and with an entry entitled Fundamentals. And in late 2014, Johan had co-founded the initiative to form a joint pavilion for the Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania at the 15th Biennale, an exhibition entitled Reporting from the Front. And in 16, he became the co-curator and designer of a joint exhibition, the Baltic Pavilion. He's done follow-up exhibitions in Tallinn and a parallel show in London entitled Baltic Material Assemblies, that'll run both at the AA School of Architecture and also the RIBA main building. At the moment, he's not only in exhibition design and curation, he's also writing in various journals. He's lectured extensively. He's currently teaching at the Urban Studies Masterclass in Urban Infrastructure at the Estonian Academy of Art, and is researched and project manager with a project called City Unfinished, maybe we'll hear about now. It's a 3-year research project. So Johan, you have the virtual floor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me see. I think it's kind of important to start where I left the Angewandte with my diploma project. This was something that I looked up today to kind of like reflect back on what I was thinking then and what were my interests back then. And I just kind of put a small title of public space under my name, and seems like this is a kind of topic that followed me throughout all these years. I don't know, probably many of you remember me in school days as a guy who had more questions than answers. So, and I think this is also very important for me and also for my career. And I'm gonna kind of try to structure this in 3 parts to kind of starting from the moment I graduated to where I kind of move on to look for more answers. I skipped academic work just to kind of focus on more kind of creative projects that I've done. So the first kind of job I ever had after graduating was actually working on the new Angewandte building for Wolfgang Ceppella, which actually unfortunately never got built. We actually got pretty far with the design. I was mostly kind of working on the atrium that you see in the picture now. It was a kind of crazy spatial exercise. Also, it was a kind of outrageous kind of reality check for actually what it means to build something like this. And also, like Hani mentioned, then I kind of shifted to Berlin to kind of see, kind of mostly out of curiosity, what else was out there, what kind of other practices are operating in the field of architecture. And Thomas was really kind of an eye-opener as a kind of architect, or trained as an architect, but working as a kind of artist, but also working on very architectural and kind of spatial ideas, and also working on something that's actually trying to kind of see the world in a kind of different way, which was also very inspiring for me to see. And then a very kind of different type of practice that I was also part of in Berlin was draft architects, which was kind of like top of the line, kind of high-end architecture. A lot of people from the Angewandte worked there, and still a lot of people from the Angewandte go there to work, which I think is a super amazing kind of place to kind of develop your skills, but also kind of to see kind of the interrelation between the design skills that we learn at the Angewandte and how they can actually be implemented in real life. So a big part of my work there was to deal with new kind of corporate architecture and kind of brand architecture of Mercedes, like from kind of basically translating kind of the design of a car into a building, and to kind of study the relationship between how different cars carry the kind of design of Mercedes and the kind of brand identity, to how different scale and kind of size spaces and kind of retail buildings can carry that kind of similar kind of design language. So this was kind of the part of me trying to become like to kind of step into this role of a kind of apprentice, to kind of really understand what the profession can be and what the different kind of really, the people that I really looked up to are doing in the profession. But at the same time, my kind of brain was always trying to still kind of ask more questions and kind of my own ideas about space and context and kind of concepts about and kind of theories about how space is kind of formed somehow kicked in. So kind of parallel to all these kind of working positions, I started doing more conceptual projects, and the kind of easiest kind of medium for these would be kind of architecture exhibition. So Interspace was in 2014 for the Venice Biennale, which we won as a kind of public competition to curate alongside Siim Tuksam, who is walking here in the pavilion right now from Studio Lin, and then Johanna Joegallo, who's also but she was also part of Studio Lin at that time. And the project was really trying to understand the relationships of kind of contemporary technology and to marry it to a degree with context of kind of local placemaking, which again was kind of tied to idea of public space and how the idea of public space is changing in kind of contemporary times, which now I kind of see that relates also back to my thesis project, which was a media cathedral in Times Square. So all these kind of ideas and questions that were at one point unanswered, I tried to get back to. But this also kind of opened up another kind of mode of practice for me, which is really kind of going a bit more towards theory and also towards discussion about ideas about space, both in kind of written form as a kind of doing a book is a really big project in itself to kind of get the people on board to kind of figure out what the kind of concepts around it would be, but also the kind of idea that architecture is also something that we just don't draw, but we also discuss and we present different ideas. This became really important to me. So kind of naturally, I was kind of craving for more of these kind of projects. So 2 years later, actually, at the time of the opening of the previous pavilion, when we were in Venice, celebrating with a bunch of friends, we came up with an idea that we actually have to do another pavilion. But then the kind of idea would be to kind of challenge the idea of a kind of national participation in Venice. And partly that all these people are from the Baltic states. Which probably for a lot of people in the Angewandte as well that don't actually live in Austria or not in the kind of German cultural kind of background, I think this is very similar that you go to another place to study, but then somewhere there's a place that's kind of being left behind or that's kind of like a home territory that's somehow always very dear to you. And at that point, I kind of felt a bit homesick and trying to kind of understand a bit more about the Baltics. And this was a kind of like a coalition of 9 curators. Actually, Niklas, I think, is still teaching at the Angewandte as well, in Effen and Christina's studio downstairs. So this was a project that actually tried to look at the Baltic states as a kind of space, kind of from 2 aspects. First of all, what is the context? And how do kind of global tendencies and kind of currents that shape the world kind of globally affect local space? So kind of historic and kind of geologic context married to kind of the changing world. It was a crazy project. First of all, we had to convince all the kind of national pavilions of Latvia, Lithuania, and my kind of home Estonia, that this time we shouldn't do kind of national pavilions, but one big shared one. So we had to win 3 big competitions to do it. It was a kind of repeat to say. And that was kind of the beginning of the actual project. And then what it kind of rendered out in the end was a kind of amazing collaboration of more than 200 practices, starting from kind of international really kind of important theory voices to kind of local practitioners to kind of marry this into a kind of very surreal kind of spatial experience. So the whole exhibition became kind of like kind of a carpet of the Baltics, and kind of to try to convey an idea of space through all these kind of different projects that range from oil pipelines to pyramids to looking at firewood or kind of transportation. So it was really kind of a time where I'm kind of looking for more questions to ask to kind of like fulfill or to kind of like give my own kind of creative ideas a certain kind of practice or a kind of reasoning. Again, this was also married with the book. So all this kind of contextual work at one point gave me a certain kind of enough confidence to kind of start my own practice. So we formed Molumba, which I think in a nutshell is our kind of motto is that we try to do only public competitions. So we do roughly 20 to 30 competitions a year. There are a lot of competitions in Estonia, and the culture of public buildings being done via a kind of public competition is quite strong here. And it's, I think in Estonia, it's quite easy to kind of get on board. So basically we got lucky. This is the first competition we did and we won. It's for a small office building, kind of like a rural administration for a small parish, which is kind of like a smaller version of a county, just to kind of give context. But I'm going to kind of talk about this last because this is one of the few projects that we actually ever built. But yeah, the idea that we work in the public realm and we do competitions for the public somehow is also a kind of a medium where you can actually put out ideas that are kind of being discussed in a kind of wider discourse. So kind of relating back to the ideas that we had in the Baltic Pavilion, that we had many people discuss something and provide kind of ideas about it. For us, actually also works in a kind of competition modus. For us, it's kind of more not just to get the next commission, but rather to kind of give a very good answer through architecture to a specific problem in the society. So this is a kind of singing stage, a kind of song festival stage in Estonia, which is kind of basically also a kind of park design. So here, really kind of like all kind of geometric knowledge that I gained from the Angewandte was kind of helpful because the idea was to create this kind of very fluid, kind of curvy landscape that kind of like just flows through all the visitors. But also, I think here there's a kind of different understanding of what structure is, for example. And this is also something that, for example, we were discussing doing this with Bollinger and also with some of the people that we studied with, like Adam Orlinsky, whose birthday is today. So I don't know, Adam, if you're listening, but happy birthday. But yeah, for us, this was a kind of very simple project because the task was simple and kind of everything kind of came together organically in one landscape. A different project for a very small island in the Baltic Sea, which doesn't have a sports hall. So the competition was to, with very low or very little kind of financial means, to kind of fill the gap and have this small island as the kind of last municipality in Estonia to have its own sports hall. But here, the idea was still to kind of try to use this kind of concept of 1 + 1 = 3. So up here, you see the two sports halls. One of them is a tennis hall, and the other one is a kind of multi-use athletics hall. To kind of marry it together in this kind of public space that kind of forms as this kind of cracking of the two big volumes. So this kind of big pile of different public attractions was something that no one asked for, but we we felt like this was kind of the appropriate way to go in order to kind of bring this kind of public space in the foreground as a kind of important moment also in the cityscape. This building will be done in a few months, but I didn't really find any good construction images because everything is happening so fast. This is the biggest wooden facade in Estonia, which basically means that we clad everything in wood. All the structure is done in wood. And this kind of like ushers me to another point of practice, which was partly informed by the Baltic Pavilion and the kind of inquiry into resources. And this is the idea that building materials also do matter. So this was the kind of project I was showing first. We executed the building in wood from kind of top to bottom, almost as a kind of sustainable answer to public buildings. it's a small scale building, just 2 stories, but it's still a challenge to build this out of wood. So basically everything that's below or kind of above foundation is done in wood. It's a kind of small pavilion in a park, like we like to call it. I think the footprint is like 1,000 square meters, so it's kind of tiny. And the most kind of exuberant or kind of prominent feature of it is this kind of double skin, or this kind of double facade, or the tuxedo, or the kind of suit, like we sometimes call it, because it's still a kind of office for city officials. It felt kind of, it needs a kind of more of a articulated facade, which kind of also forms a kind of public gallery space, which people and kind of all the city inhabitants can kind of inhabit. Also kind of relating back to kind of ideas like since Renaissance about kind of how to form public space with architecture, with all these kind of beautiful galleries. So it's but it also works both ways, because this is a kind of public building in everyone's attention, and it's in a very public position in the city. People will be very curious to look in. So this also kind of acts as a kind of buffer to kind of allow for a bit of rest and kind of, let's say, away from public eye for the office workers. There's millions of pictures here, so I'm going to just quickly run through. The gallery is going all over, like on every side of the triangular building. And geometrically, actually, it's, I just remembered this. It might be a funny quote, but one of the beautiful kind of objects I had in my references for the diploma was the chandeliers that you guys designed in asymptote, this kind of silver shape that can be stacked and multiplied. So this became one of the kind of references also for the facade of this building, but kind of shying away from complex geometries and kind of working with the material. And this made it kind of like into a voxelated version of those kind of curved spaces. So this kind of, the exterior part of the columns and the facade are kind of different. So there's also kind of like a geometric transition. So that here you see, first of all, everything is kind of carefully done in wood, but also you see the complexity of it, which we actually translated into a very simple one module that we 3D printed and gave to the builders and said that this might give you kind of enough of a hint so you can actually work out how the facade is built. Here's just some of the detailing of how this kind of space is crafted. There's a kind of set of ideas also regarding how the material is treated. The kind of interior of the galleries is kind of like more grayish because it will anyway over time kind of fade. The kind of outermost layer, which is kind of a flat skin, is kind of left untreated. It's larch from Siberia, which would mean that this would kind of age naturally over time. But we wanted to have a contrast kind of towards the inside, because the inside is again a bit different. It's basically a free plan, and in the middle of that free plan is a square box, which houses all the kind of office spaces and kind of meeting rooms and kind of hideaway spaces that you would have in a normal office building. What is interesting to us was the kind of realization that we can actually, when we're working with wood, we can build it like a kind of cardboard model, that all the pieces that we assemble, all the kind of cross-laminated timber panels would actually be the final finishing. So it's not kind of traditional building in the sense that you would actually have the structure, then you would treat the structure to get the interior finishes. But this is kind of like, we coined a term called timber brut, which means that this is kind of the panel that you saw in the previous image. It's just been sandblasted to kind of give it a more uniform texture. Here you see a bit more of that. So really kind of using this building to get way over our head using timber and kind of trying to embed all these ideas in the architecture. Just kind of few interior shots. And when we're working with such kind of pure, simple shapes, you probably don't notice it because they're not there, but there are no pipes or no any technical, for example, ventilation shafts or anything like that, because they're all kind of hidden inside wood. And the kind of innovation here was to kind of lift the second story up, the floor of the second story up. So all the piping is kind of hidden and all the kind of cardboard-like aesthetic of wooden panels is exposed. Yeah, and this is kind of just the kind of black cube in the middle, which actually becomes, because there are no direct windows that where you can see outside, but rather indirect light from above, it becomes these kind of weird colored kind of poche spaces inside the kind of otherwise rather open floor plan. And this is the kind of council hall in the kind of heart of the building. And it's red because of the flag, obviously. Not too happy with the interior designer's choice for the lighting, but kind of the exterior lighting is something that also we kind of looked at carefully. And at night, the building really becomes this kind of public space, kind of jammed in between the office building and the most kind of outermost skin. So it becomes this kind of really weird monster object in the city of Saue. And people really tend to use it, and kind of for a city that didn't have a city center, this one building kind of laid the foundations for kind of future city developments. I'm going to stop here because it's been quite a few slides of this building, but again, thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, Johan, thank you. Brilliant work. It's great to see, and it's amazing actually to see, to remember your thesis project. Thank you for putting it up there. I although I never have forgotten it, and to see the actual strange and beautiful bridge you've built between your interest at that time in the public realm, which was in Times Square, and had to do with media and had to do with the kind. And I remember your crazy images, which were early out of the gate in terms of the sort of augmented reality ideas of spatiality and the way you want that underbelly to be at that time as a student, and then to see you, through your career so far, and it's still early in your career, obviously, but moving from learning about the trials and tribulations of brand-oriented architecture. I'm glad you survived that, and then also. Of course, working with Thomas was a brilliant move, and getting you to this point now where you're actually producing a kind of public spectacle that's actually very apropos to the community, but also environmentally. I don't know, you didn't talk much about the project environmentally, but it looks to me like it has a really interesting sort of sustainable story that's also running in parallel to this idea of spectacle. But I applaud it. I guess my question to you, if I have one, and it's a selfish question because I'm really interested in hearing how you handle it, because we all have to handle it as architects when it comes to this kind of work. But how do you navigate the sort of thorny world of let's say rules, regulations, the local community, and I can imagine a building like this might have ruffled a few feathers, at least in the drawing stage. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. This is not something that the people kind of that are from there and live nearby would applaud at first sight. So this was always coined as a kind of weird building. But to me, I think it's important to always kind of reference to ideas about architecture, because let's be honest, it's a very old profession. A lot of things have already been done. And I think this is where the research that I've been doing kind of gives me enough of kind of backbone to kind of say that even though it might look strange, it's kind of embedded, it's carrying some ideas of kind of different projects, and it's got some kind of things that you might not perceive on paper, but in space, in kind of reality, when you kind of really walk through it, and kind of if it caters to the human body, it becomes kind of clear, and it starts to kind of work, and it becomes kind of like it becomes kind of real architecture in a weird way. Because for me, I think it's always important to kind of always imagine kind of a human body in relationship to the architecture that's surrounding it. So I think that's what I try to put into the projects. And that's also something that we sometimes use to kind of argue to someone that doesn't kind of really feel like it when they look at our projects. So kind of like the idea of spatial experience, I think, is very important.
I mean, it's interesting because you're delving deeply into exhibition design, into the biennales, into you know, that entire world. Well, let's put it this way. I think you have a remarkable sensitivity to the human condition and to the human body politic. And I think that's kind of sensitized you to it. I mean, it obviously, you know, was in its nascent stage when you were a student, but when you went out into the world and started to actually tackle large-scale political projects, and I mean political, I mean projects that involve the polis, that involve various interest groups. I mean, putting together the Baltic states into a pavilion is no easy task, I can imagine, and it was brilliantly done. But I think that gives you the you know, what I see here in this project, and it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of it comes from all of those experiences, is this notion, and we used to talk about this in the 70s and 80s, was more of what's called pride of place. Was a kind of interesting, you know, jargonism, I guess, at the time, but it's there is a kind of notion here of pride, and without it necessarily being you know, sort of xenophobic or closed or closed to, you know, you've kind of found a nice way to produce something that is global and international, but very local at the same time. I think that's really kind of fascinating. Anyway, thanks so much. Wonderful to see your work and to see your career trajectory from those days when you were wet behind the ears when you left us eons ago. Okay, so we're going to, and again, if any of you have questions, please, let's try and have a little discussion afterwards. It'd be nice if you guys stayed on and asked any of these architects questions. Okay, Lenka Petrakova. You know, Lenka and I have, well, let's put it this way. It was fascinating working with Lenka as a student. She also happened to come and work at my studio in New York briefly, which was a pleasure for us and an honor for us to have her there with us for the time that she was with us. She then, yeah, fortunate for her, unfortunate for us, went off to work with Zaha in London, has become a senior design architect at Zaha Hadid, where she's specializing in basically design of high-rise buildings, such as the OPPO headquarters in Shenzhen, and the CECEP campus in Shanghai. Lenka came to Vienna from Slovak University of Technology in Bratislava after receiving a double bachelor's degree from the Faculty of Architecture and the Faculty of Engineering. During her studies in Vienna with us, Lenka participated in an exchange program with SciArc, and she also did an exchange with a brief stint at the Technical University in Vienna, and I think she speaks to that that you know, kind of quality and generosity of sharing between the different schools, their intelligence. Lenka believes strongly that a continuous interest in education is a vital aspect of building a strong career. In 2020, Lenka received another postgraduate diploma in professional practice at Westminster University and joined the Royal Institute of British Architects. Lenka has exhibited widely, and the work she did here in my studio when we did the Future of Antarctica work that we ended up showing in Venice, with her drawing on the poster, which was brilliant, and that went on to be shown also in Beijing, and so her work already, even as a student, had started to travel quite widely. Since then, she's accumulated some important rewards and accolades, and including the 2020 Grand Prix of Architecture last year, which was brilliant. She received the award for architectural innovation of the oceans from the Jacques Rougerie Foundation, an award given to for her what had started as her thesis project at the school. And then now Lenka will be giving a TED talk at the upcoming TED Bratislava in Bratislava. So Lenka, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for organizing this amazing event, and thank you, Hani, for introduction. I would like to say that Angewandte always felt to me like my second home. So it's amazing to be back and see you all. And as Hani said, yeah, I'm giving a TED talk, and I had the opportunity now to talk to in many different interviews, and they always ask me, you know, which of the universities I was in is my favorite, because apparently I already attended 6 of them. And I always say it was Angewandte, because the way how you really nurtured us, and how you were leading us to the way how to find design and to the discussion and teamwork is something what is really important for me as an architect. And it's something what I would not be able to, you know, even do my day-to-day without it. So I really enjoy the studies, and I'm really happy to be able to be here with you. I start with the thesis work that Hani was mentioning. And, yes, by surprise, the work won last year the 2020 Grand Prix Award, and I'm really, really happy to all of the attention it got, because it opened up the discussion about, you know, the wide problem of trash we have, and that is for me as well one of the large purposes of architecture, to really start discussions about the social problems and problems in our cities, and the way how as architects we can address them. And yeah, this project would not be if I would not be at Angewandte. So big thanks to all of the team at the university. But today I will talk about the life in the fast lane, in a sense of my life at Zaha Hadid Architekt. And I joined Zaha Hadid Architekt right after I graduated in 2017, and it is a great experience since then. It is a 450 people office with satellite offices all around the world. So I work in the London-based studio, and you know there are many more in New York, Sydney, Beijing, Dubai, Hong Kong. And the office is having projects all around the globe. And this is as well, you know, visible in the day-to-day practice and the projects I work on. So within the last years, there is a large increase in projects in China. So as well, when you look at my portfolio over the last 4 years, I had a chance to work on 20 projects in 10 countries, with most of them being actually in China. And yes, then as well projects in Europe and Middle East, Saudi and UAE. But China is really becoming one of the, I call it like incubators for architects, where you know you can try really anything you can and cannot imagine. So considering the typologies, the office is working on a wide range of typologies, and I had as well a chance in my years at the studio to work mostly on office and residential buildings, but as well on a hospitality and cultural buildings. And you know, if I compare it to my previous practice, so I had the chance to work as well in Slovakia, then as Hani said shortly, with him in New York at Untitled Architecture, and as well for Kubhema Blau. And I think for in Zaha Hadid Architekt, the prevailing part are really the office buildings and the headquarters, and this is not what I was before exposed to. And considering the stages that I work on, I mostly work on the stage in England, we call it stage 1 to 3, what is usually the concept stages to planning application. And so that is my mostly day-to-day work. And I would like to talk to you today about 3 really interesting projects that I had a chance to cooperate on. Yeah, well, as I said, I work on 20 projects, but sadly, in the commercial practice, we cannot always show everything what we wish to show. So I would like to introduce you today the project of the Al Jada Central Hub in Sharjah in UAE, the Oppo headquarters in Shenzhen, China, and the CEST Shanghai campus. And to start with the Arjada hub, this is a beautiful urban development, and it's a new leisure and entertainment destination in UAE. It's a center hub. So the center hub is designed based on the water droplet. So the first moment when the water droplet hits the surface, and then this moment is captured in an array of elliptical buildings. And this split of a building and creating various courtyards and canyons is as well taken into account the sustainability and the environmental approaches of creating this cool down courtyards and kind of capturing the wind and channeling the wind to be able to cool down the inner side of the buildings. And so in UAE, the summers are extremely hot, so to work with the possibility of creating microclimates as well with water features, with a lot of greenery and parks was really important. And as well, the building is operating, entirely on a solar energy. And for example, for all of the beautiful parks that we have there, for irrigation is a recycled water used. So maybe one thing that I would want to as well explain. So I was always interested as well into sustainability and mostly the topics. And I think during my time at Angewandte, as well, the studio topics we had the opportunity to choose were really, strong in looking at what is really changing in our society, considering the climate change and the new emerging topics those we were not before exposed to as architects. And this somehow stayed with me as well throughout the project at Continent, but as well throughout my interest in the practice. And I believe today the sustainability in some shape or form is always part of design of our buildings, and it's really important. And I'm really glad that as well at the practice where I work on in Zaha the Architekt, we are really taking care of really implementing the most we can to make the buildings more sustainable and the management of the buildings as well more sustainable. So the next project is the Oppo headquarters in Shenzhen. This is a really exciting concept where we actually took the entire course of the buildings out to separate towers. So as you can see, it's 4 towers, but actually 2 of them are filled with the services. And then this is allowing us to create this beautiful open plan, this beautiful open plan office spaces. And this is also changing the way how people really perceive the building, because you don't just have the idea that you see a skyscraper, but when you are in the floor, you kind of, you have the view outside, but you don't really perceive the space from inside, that you have this beautiful space. And this is changed in this building, that by introducing a large void of 20 stories within the building, we are really making a large interconnectivity on the floors, not just in the horizontal way because of opening up the floor slabs from the cores, but as well in the vertical way. And it's changing the way how people are interacting and how the different departments of the Oppo headquarters can cooperate and work. And I find it really fascinating about this building. And as well, we managed to have some of the viewing decks in these beautiful roof shaped areas. And I think this is really an enormous challenge for architects in the practice, because usually this roof skylights get occupied by all of the MEP and technology. And it's really good that it did not in case of this building, and we managed to offer something for the visitors and as well for the employees of Oppo. And the third project I want to introduce you is the CEST Shanghai building. I cannot show more images, but what was interesting about this scheme is that it's actually a combination of 6 different buildings. So it's 3 of these towers. Those are looking like interlocking rings, and this is to break the volume and to not have this really large mass that is usually perceived with people. But by making it interlocking rings, it's really changing the scale of the building. And the CSEP Shanghai campus is integrating the 6 buildings, so it's 3 new towers, and it's as well integrating already existing old sugar factories on the side. So it is not just new, but as well bringing in refurbishment projects. And this is as well something what I believe is now happening much more in the architectural practice, that is as well part of the sustainability and turning on more to sustainable projects, that we are not just trying to rebuild and build always new, but we are trying to look at what is there and how we can integrate it and how we can use it. And it's very important for the practice of architects. And yeah, so these are the 3 projects I worked on during the last 4 years, and I wish I could show you more, but I cannot for now. But I hope if we do this again in another 5 years, I would be able to introduce you some more groundbreaking projects and some more towers, because as Hani said, most of my portfolio is consisting of towers, and it's funny because I'm 150 centimeters high, so and working on towers of 200 meters, but everyone has its hobbies. So.
I used to say about Zaha, it's very funny you said that, because one day I was walking with Zaha between, in Rotterdam, we were walking between the Kunsthal, the Rems theater, and the NIE, and she was walking extremely slowly, the way she used to walk. We miss her dearly, with her little, her feet would sort of moving along. And I said, Zaha, come on, I'm late. I was giving a lecture. And I just finished watching her lecture, and I said, I'm late for my talk, and we really have to move a little faster. And she's like, honey bunny, if you don't want to walk with me, go ahead, right? Sort of thing. And I said, I get it. I get your work now. In all your work, you move really fast. Your work is really about moving through space as fast as you can. So it's very funny you said that your height has made you kind of obsessed with tall buildings. Fascinating and great to see your trajectory. I wanted to ask you a question pertaining to your TED Talk, probably. I don't know, I think your TED Talk will probably deal with the Antarctic Pavilion, I would imagine, because you're getting a lot of attention about that around the world. You've been in a lot of publications, a lot of interviews. Maybe you could give us a few words on that, on how you're framing or reframing that project post school. Because I can imagine, when we did it together, when you were with us in school, it was very highly theoretical.
You froze a bit.
The whole idea of sort of gathering. What's that?
You were frozen for a bit, but it's okay.
I'm losing connection again. I'm so sorry. But anyway, the point being, in case I disappear, well, I guess just a few words on maybe how you are in the fast lane, and I like the fact that you referred to it, between obviously a very, very powerful and forceful practice, as Zaha and the architects are doing, tall buildings, especially in China. But at the same time, on the other side, you are extremely interested in cleaning up the oceans. You created this beautiful poetic project about, repair of the oceans, as well as dealing with the future. Is there some kind of a link there you want to talk about, maybe, or maybe not? Maybe life in the fast lane means separating church and state, and pursuing one's passion while trying to also, pursue in a more pragmatic level, make a living. How do you feel about the split between those two aspects of your career right now?
I have to say that as I have the opportunity to work as well for Zaha, the architect, the research is still a large part of our everyday. So I still don't feel like I just have to, give up of all my ideas and and just work for living. So my work is really fulfilling in this way. So that is to the first part. To the second part that you were asking about the 8th continent. So I think this is gonna be for me some kind of a project that's gonna stay with me till end of my life probably, or till I find an investor. But I don't know what's gonna be sooner. But I'm really interested into the material research, and maybe this is something what I didn't really explore so much at the university, and I got more to know also in the practice, where we really have to look at the materiality of the buildings and the geometry optimization, and this is also what now interests me on the project, but more in a way of a future research of materials as well, and how we can maybe change the trajectory of architects with introducing a more smart materials and the research of Mary Oxman and 4D printing.
It's funny, you reminded me when I was more or less at your stage, and I had moved to New York City, and I'd worked with Lebbeus Woods a little bit, and I had a lot of very conceptual work in my portfolio. And Lebbeus actually was kind of rough with me. I remember him saying to me, Annie, smoking constantly, I know you're in it for the long haul, he said to me once. And I was like, what does that mean? And he basically implied that he could see that I was really interested in pursuing my fantasies, my dreams, my sort of what it meant to be an architect. And for me, what it meant to be an architect was not necessarily working, producing, let's say, kind of traditional corporate architecture, right? Or any corporate. But at the same time, I ended up, starting to do some commercial work. And I remember Lebbeus was very upset with me about that, because he came from an era where the paper architects and the notion of you either are true to your word and you pine away forever within the discipline, producing polemics and stories and narratives. And there were a number of paper architects like that, or you go into practice. And I think in a weird way, when I look at what you're talking about and all the work so far today by you guys, I can see that the generations have changed dramatically, time has changed dramatically, and it's not difficult to walk in two places at the same time, as perhaps it was for Lebbeus's generation and for a previous generation of modern architects and postmodern architects. So I applaud you on that. And I like what you just said, because what you just said, which I don't know if anybody caught it, but I definitely caught it, is that the Antarctica project, which started in school, will stay with you for your career. And if you can find an investor, and that's really interesting. And that speaks a little bit back to what Ewa was talking about, which is understanding the machinery, understanding the mechanism by which architecture works. So if your end game or your goal is to, like a Trojan horse, be inside the belly of the beast, and that's not to say Zaha's office is the beast, because there are very corporate firms. They are absolutely still one of the most interesting firms in the world, but you're learning the ropes and the way in which things get done, especially tall, large, complex buildings, which is really fascinating for you. Congratulations on that. So we look forward to your TED Talk. We'll all try and find a way to tune in on that. And
I think it's going to be in Slovak for now, so you might need to wait a bit till they translate.
No, I have a really good AI program on my computer that can translate any language.
Okay.
It's not perfectly accurate, but it'll do the trick. Thank you, Lenka, and stick around. Hopefully there's some questions for you at the end.
Thank you, Hani.
Let's move on now. Thank you so much for that. It was great. So Vicki Sanders graduated in 2017 and is now an architect and a researcher. She holds a senior lecturer position at the University of Innsbruck while working on her PhD as part of the SFB Advanced Computational Design Collaborative Research Program. She earned her master's degree here with us at the Angewandte, as I said, in 2017. These past few years, Vicki has accumulated some pretty impressive and important scholarships and awards, which she has been utilizing, as one should, those things to support her research, her work in the fields of responsive urbanism and temporary architectural interventions. Since graduating, Vicki has taught several workshops such as Society in Motion at the 3-year Erasmus Plus summer school program, parametric design workshops here at the Angewandte, as well as courses at the University of Liechtenstein and the Tallinn Architecture School. She's taught and been a critic of design studios at the TU Innsbruck, the TU Kassel, University of Applied Arts, and the TU Berlin. And in 2019 and 2020, she was part of the advanced geometry team at another hero of mine and friend, Studio Olafur Eliasson in Berlin. So, Vicki, the floor is yours. Nice to see you again.
Thanks so much. It's very, very nice to see you all. Thanks for the invitation. Funny enough, I prepared these many colorful lanes by accident, but it fits very well to that panel discussion. So this is my timeline, and I will somehow show to the students how to do your 4 years after diploma without working in an architecture office, I guess, which can be a good and a bad thing. I don't know, I'm very happy with my life at the moment, but you know, I don't know the other side really. So this is me. My name is Viki Sándor, and yeah, I graduated in 2017 at Hani Studio. And basically this timeline is a very nice diagram for evaluating my 4 years for myself even. And yeah, it shows when I'm studying, when I'm teaching, when I'm doing design, not that often recently, honestly, and when I'm doing research. Actually, I think teaching is on overload a little bit, which is maybe a good thing. So what happened to me in between 2010 and 17 is that I was at the Angewandte studying first for 1 single year at Studio Prix, and then all the left at Hani's studio, except 1 semester when I did the crossover. And nobody should worry. I think 7 years, which I wrote here, is not normal for a master degree, but I did the whole study. So it's maybe okay, a plus 2 years for a 5-year studies to do. Okay, what we did at Hani Studio, I guess the agenda is somehow remained similar, but I gained quite a nice understanding of how to deal with technology, society, certain microclimates, and also point clouds in architecture, which I think became my fetish in 2015, and until today, it somehow stayed with me, and this is the base of the research we are doing at the ISD2. So these point clouds were taking me to my diploma project, which was about how these point clouds could potentially become an urban infrastructure in the city of Vienna in the form of or format of flying machines. Of course, it was a utopian project, but I was pretty obsessed by it, and I was working on it for, I think, over a year in the first part. And yeah, I think it was a very nice time. So I would recommend everyone taking master diploma or thesis serious, because it can just somehow put you in a place for the next years, I guess. And this is what happened to me since, sorry, yes. We had this great collaboration on that project all together, I would say. And then I left, and then I somehow didn't feel like leaving the Angewandte work style. So I just stayed with the project. It was called the Permanently Temporary. And I was just keep working on it and submitting it to the Young Talent Architecture Award and to Stadtstipendium, applied for the TISHE. And I was maybe lucky enough that I got these supports from different organizations. And that really, somehow helped me to stay with the research or to stay with the diploma project and understand how far we can take utopias or how critical should we be about them during our studies. So on the first hand, I really wanted to build a drone, which I proposed in the diploma. It didn't work out, but I was at least working together with some drone specialists, and they helped me to evaluate the project properly. And the result of half a year or a little bit more than half a year research on that was a review, which examines the ideas and highlights potentials. And basically this review and also the narrative I developed around it got me the Superscape 2018 prize, which is also something I would really highly recommend to apply. You as a student, it's I think every second year happening, organized in Vienna. And it can really give you some financial support if you want to develop your project further. So this was a great thing. Then I have to mention that we also went on an experimental artistic path together with Matthew Tem, who I think is here in the audience actually. And we made on the basis of temporary space, temporary climate, an experimental dinner party in Innsbruck, where we cooked with the changing climate. And then we repeated this also in Vienna, making it more in a party format. And yes, I thought it's also nice to put that Sille and Sim invited us to Tallinn 2 years ago for the Biennale, Tallinn Biennale, Beauty Matters, and we were very happy and lucky to hold some workshops with their students, which was, I think, a lot of fun. And I think this is somehow the whole point of this presentation, that we always pop up in each other's life, I think, the Angewandte crew. So the group you study with really is important to keep and to keep it alive. Yes, so, and then my teaching career started, I would say, when Professor Anton Falkais asked if I would like to participate in the teaching of the Society in Motion workshop series, which Hani also mentioned, where I was rather focusing on visual storytelling and how to really communicate architecture ideas, even if they are like more speculations or more utopias, dystopias, and how to use different filmic tools, timeline storyboards to develop great narratives which make it understandable for your audience. This narrative teaching is not a solitary one from my side, because I'm also not a filmmaker. So I was lucky to meet Michael Waldrop, and we teach together. He's a filmmaker. He's actually working at Olafur Eliasson studio and doing the films there, but he also collaborates on this workshop series with me. And we still teach in Kassel. We are having our next workshop this week. And I think it's just very nice to work together with people who are professional in their field, and you can really combine the knowledge in front of the students on Zoom. So yeah, so it's a weird, very colorful diagram, I know, but it really tries to show how this project, the master project or the diploma project, takes me to all these different places. So because of Tisha, because I really wanted to work somewhere abroad, and I got also, supported by Austria, I decided to go to Berlin to have fun and also work for Studio Olafur Eliasson. I was part of the geometry team. It's called geometry specialist, the position. I really like it in my portfolio, or CV, sorry. And I had, I think, the biggest fun task. So the first one was the design of the cutlery for Fjordenhus restaurant, the list, which it was an SOS project, and basically I had to combine wooden branches with cutlery heads and scan them, merge them, and print them, or basically produce them first out of wax and then out of metal, silver also. It was very interesting and a funny design task, maybe one of the few I had in the last 4 years. But what was very important for me at the studio, that I got the research topic or focus of collapsible volumes. We were looking into spheres, how they could be collapsed at the studio, which is more difficult than it sounds. And it really, I got hooked on the idea of collapsing volumes and folding, also because it really connects the idea of temporality, which I used for my project to be developed already at the Angewandte, and that could be another way to go. So currently, together again with Matt, we really like to work together. We develop a foldable system, which we are trying to make our first prototype this summer, but we use certain modules which are capable of collapsing, but at the same time they are structurally stable along one axis, and this could create very interesting foldable space frames, basically, which perform nicely structurally, but at the same time they have this temporary adaptive manner. And we just attended the AAG conference with our workshop, which was 1 year postponed. It's the Advances in Architectural Geometry conference. And that was very interesting to work together with the participants on these foldable structures and really think, having a discussion where this can take us, or what should be the first prototype design. Okay, so but where I am at the moment, right now, I'm sitting in Innsbruck because I'm here a senior lecturer, and very happy because we just had our finals of the 1 year bachelor studio, which we were teaching together with Clemens Sitzmann, also here, I think, on Zoom, and Stefan Rutzinger, Christina Schniger, and Tilman Fabini. We here at the ISD are pretty much interested in the idea of creating deep structures, so volumetric spaces, and the students were asked to look into artwork of specific artists and understand how they deal with this notion of deepness and vagueness. And I think the projects were pretty successful, and it was a very nice year to spend very intensely with 20 students. And some of them might be your classmates next year or the year after, I don't know. You will see. But yeah, I really like to do this work. I think we also have a lot of interesting input exchange. And I really wanted to show this because these are the people who were asked to come and visit us online during the 1 year. And I highlighted all the people who are from the Angewandte architecture department. And this is just very nice. I think that we managed to exchange so much within this network which we built. So we had Abraham from Australia just a week ago with us. Then Rangel came many times, who was studying at Studio Lin. Johanna Arthur from Estonia, I guess somewhere close to Sille and Johan at the moment. Then Marie-Therese, another generation, but she was also supporting the student work. Yeah, Matthias, he works here in Innsbruck, but also from Angewandte. We have Angelica, Danny Ehrenberg, Eva many times. Then Matt, of course, and Alexandra Moisi from Lin Studio, and Cornelia Feist from Lin Studio from years before. But I think this is very nice that you keep the friendship and you really ask your friends for ideas and also connect them even with your students or colleagues. Yes, and I now really go to the last part of my 4 years, which is the research we do here at the ISD. So on one hand, I'm doing my PhD. I'm very much at the beginning of it, and the PhD is dealing with point clouds and how point clouds could potentially become architecture notation systems. So how you could communicate design through point clouds and through data storage. But at the same time, this research supports a bigger one, which is called SFB. It's a huge collaboration between 3 universities in Austria, TU Wien, Graz, and Innsbruck. And we are here in Innsbruck dealing with one of the subtopics, which is computational immediacy. You can see the team here. We really like everybody. And we have 3 mathematicians, 4 architects, and Robbie, who just knows it all. We stole him from New York for the project, and we are very happy to have him actually in Innsbruck still. And maybe as to finish it, I can show the video, which is somehow an introduction to the research. we had it presented at the Biennale in the virtual pavilion, and yeah, the video was produced by the team, and it's showing how we think of point clouds as a medium for communicating space and to express certain ideas such as vagueness and deepness. But at the same time, we also highlight the potentialities of these point clouds, how they could become a medium to create design more immediate. And we use, our aim is actually to create a 2D to 3D workflow. So designing with images, but still in the 3D space through point cloud with the use of machine learning. Maybe I run it a little bit faster. So the idea is to have images which potentially could become 3D point clouds in the digital space. And these 3D point clouds then could be actually manipulated, but also generated by a machine, which our mathematicians are teaching at the moment. And it's a, I always call it a baby, which is just about to go to kindergarten. So it's not very smart yet, but we are producing the training data, and it's a very interesting process to work together with people who are coming from a different discipline or different field. And we try to find the vocabulary and yeah, somehow the way how to communicate and develop a successful minimum 4-year-long project. Yes, so we are also dealing with the idea how point clouds could become solidified in the digital space. And that's why we are looking into volumetric design methods. And these are student projects which are coming from the Bachelor Design Studio, since we somehow try to connect the research also with the brief of the design studios at the ISD to get a very close relationship between the researchers and the students already. So I think that was the many lanes. I don't know how fast they are, but at least they are colorful. And and now I would like to zoom back in to this diagram. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vicki. Fantastic. No, definitely lots of fast lanes you're in at the same time. But I think, you know, what's really interesting, and I have to say this, I mean, and I, you know, I'm always, one of the reasons I teach, and one of the reasons I love the Angewandte and why I teach there in particular is that when you guys get onto something and when you have a sense of purpose and a kind of an addiction, there's no stopping you. I mean, it's just amazing to watch you addicted to research, addicted to ideas, addicted to collaboration, and you're playing in a very serious way. And I remember when I first started at the Angewandte, I had this slogan up on the wall that came from Laurie Anderson. That was serious fun. I don't know if you remember that. It was in the old school. We put it up on the wall in big letters. And I always loved that expression of Laurie Anderson's, which might have come from somewhere else, and she might have cribbed it from somewhere. But the idea that fun is an incredibly important part of research, and the serious side of it is what makes it so critical. It's not frivolous. It's not wasting time. In fact, the belief that you're not wasting time is part of the passion of research. And you see that with artists, and you see that, and it's great to see it with architects, with a young architect like you. I guess my question, you know, it's really also interesting to watch you navigate the turbulent seas of grants and stipends and and keeping afloat, right? Because what you're talking about is basically fueling your research through programs that are available to you, right? To make an income and to be able to survive. And that's one of the great things about Europe, I would say, versus the States, is that, you know, you can actually find lots of support to do research, and that's really critical and very important thing that hopefully never goes away. So, question. I guess my question is really about your 5 years out. I didn't ask this to anybody else because I didn't want to. But in your case, I'm fascinated with where you imagine yourself 5 years from today. Are you there, or are you frozen?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Very shocked by the question.
Well, I don't mean it. I don't mean like, I don't mean it like, oh, I will have a yacht and live in, in Ibiza sort of thing. I mean, like, do you, I mean, it's a tough question because in a way I think you will keep going, but I think the fact that you're beginning to get very disciplined about the research you're doing with the various individuals you're doing it with is really great. And the fact that you have such a great network, a lot of it coming from the Angewandte, if not the majority of it, which is fantastic. Do you see yourself kind of moving further and further with that network, doing more and more research and more development, or do you see yourself with Matthew spawning a kind of practice, maybe, and sort of dividing off? How do you imagine your? That's a tough question.
I think
it's a good. I'm not going to answer it, and that's a crazy thing to ask me.
No, I think it's a good question because I like to answer it. Maybe I don't like to plan, I think, and maybe this is something which, like, we just talked about it today with Eva, actually, that how strategic you are with your after studies or even during studies years. This is really up to you, but I am not capable of being strategic. So it does stress me sometimes because I feel I should put some more strategy in my planning. But even though I love to do schedules and plannings for the next week, but I can't do it for too long term. So it might stop, and I might force myself to really think ahead. But at the moment, I still enjoy this idea of I'm just having snooze period. And then I rather just stop and look, and maybe build something to this weird looking diagram. And then I ask myself if I am happy where I am. I think, I don't know where I will be in 5 years, but I am interested, of course, in doing things parallel. And I think actually once I asked you after my studies, I was a little bit lost how to manage your life, maybe exactly because of that strategy pressure. And you also said that having a place in a university, having a place in a practice somewhere where you can learn, and having a place where you can develop your own ideas is a nice way to go. And I think I'm aiming for it, but I'm fine now.
Well, I'm so glad I gave you good advice, because you could have said to me, you told me to. But it's great.
Eva wants to say something.
Yeah, I want to say something. I'm really sorry, but it's a very interesting question, Hani. And I just have to tell you that I think Vicki and me will join forces at some moment in time. And actually, we've been working on the project in the beginning of this year. Unfortunately, that one didn't make it, but it was a great also collaboration. And as you remember, we actually at Studio Rashid, we did quite an interesting project, the Bitcoin Tower. Do you remember?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Beautiful.
So maybe we will carry on.
Yes, I mean, with Eva, we talk a lot, and I think this is very good at the Angewandte, that you do build close relationships with your colleagues and they remain. And then I think it's just, it will all be fine.
What makes me so happy is that, when you guys were students of mine and we were students and with working with all of us, I always worry that, it's like the old adage about childhood. They say that children are born artists, all children, regardless of wherever you are. Every kid is an artist, but life sort of deals you, blow after blow after blow, until eventually they somehow, life takes the artist out of you, right? And those who don't let it go continue. And sometimes my joke is, when my son was 3 or 4, I used to say to Lisanne all the time, if he just kept on doing that for the next 25 years, he's going to be very famous, right? Like it's like a body of work on clay. It's a very interesting, let's say, it's a very interesting dynamic to be able to navigate where you want to be an adult, right? Where you want to have the sort of creativity drawn out, and what you want to hold on to in terms of play. And I think the architect, and I'm seeing it today with all of you guys, is really has to be a kind of maestro, a master of navigating the world of play versus the world of learned knowledge and what we are supposed to do. And I think I applaud you very much, Viki, for the play. I mean, the exuberance, which is in fact tenfold of what it was when you left us as a graduate. And so that's amazing to see that your joy and sort of enjoyment of making. Have we crashed again? I crashed. No? Okay.
I don't move much.
Well, anyway, thank you so much for that. And we will, that was very, very, very beautiful work. And nice to see some other Asymptote alum, the Stefan, and who else did you work with? Clemens, of course, yeah.
We do the whole year together, and I think we keep going.
Well, we miss Clemens and Stefan a lot.
He is here. I can see.
They were great. Next time, I'm going to get those guys on a talk, and they can talk about why they left Asymptote. I'm kidding.
Or for teaching.
All right. So thank you. So Sille Pihlak is graduated from, I've got it 2013, maybe I've got it wrong, but I believe it's around 13. And is a practicing architect, researcher and tutor and co-founder of Algorithmic Timber Architecture, a research group at the Estonian Academy of Arts. Sille completed her master's degree here with us at the Angewandte and has worked as a design architect with Morphosis in Los Angeles and also in Vienna with Kupim Blau. In 2015, together with Slim Tuksam, she started an experimental research-led office called Part-Practice for Architecture, Research and Theory. Part's built designs have been internationally recognized, particularly for and recognized particularly for their reuse of the use of innovative construction technologies, methodologies, and techniques. In 2020, Sille defended her doctoral thesis and received her PhD on methodological development of semantic modularity for algorithmic timber architecture, which I won't even pretend I know what that's about, but I hope we'll find out now. So Sille, great to have you. And also, Sille, also you've been a visiting critic with us, and it's been great, and it's nice to see you again.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And do the other fascinating work. It's so good to see what Viki and Eva do. But to start with, I hope you all see my screen. I think what's most important, what has changed since I graduated from Angewandte is the shift from drafting to constructing, and I don't know if you remember, but the thesis project in 2013 was a generation of. I mean, I think our generation was our geometry group that was still before Hani came along, sculpting quite of a wild animals. Then I think further systemization has been going on since then towards a realizable project, and I guess the first skills of this we gained on constructing the models, and funnily enough. My thesis model is currently in a permanent collection of Museum of Estonian Architecture under a category of fantasy, and that really surprised me that this project is so precisely something that has little hope, if any, to be something more than just a fantasy. And that's something that I guess I've been continuing with, is how to construct the unicorns, the wildest ideas that one could think of. And I do understand if looking at the contemporary architecture, one would see a lot of inhabitable sculptures, and to my mind, in uni, I was still thinking that it's as easy as crumbling a paper and then zooming out to have a concert hall. So I think the further step on from there has been towards actually crumbling the polygons instead of the paper, and seeing where this could take us. So I've chosen my weapons together with Siim Tuksam, who is getting married tomorrow, by the way. So yeah, I think what has been changed from uni to the current state is drafting the fantasy towards constructing it. So yeah, the thesis project really dealt with how to rejuvenate public transport in LA. While I was living there, it really felt like a huge problem. And this car crash geometry that I mentioned before, I think that that's been something that has been continually tried to be systemized in my work. This model was the first step in trying to realize that, and yeah, as I said, it's now in a permanent collection of Museum of Estonian Architecture, where it's categorized under the top of fantasy, and that's where my title is also driven from the fact that one the sculpting of those ideas really needed to get more realized in order to achieve or get to the point of truly start constructing without letting go the wild and quite ambitious ideas of experimenting. So I think since now we have been instead of going towards a commercial architecture, we have been really trying to find ways how to construct those unicorns. And in when one would be going through what contemporary architecture means nowadays, it's often about inhabitable sculpture. So even as inhabitable as crumbled papers. And I think that's something that I've been trying to realize also with my PhD, is like how to go from crumbled paper to crumbled polygons and embed into the starting geometry already much more information, including the material and certain qualities. So I've also weaponed up with Siim, who's having a wedding tomorrow. So that's why my connection might be unstable, because I'm in the middle of organizing this. We started an office part, practice for architecture research and theory, where all those elements, what also been mentioned before, like writing, curating lecture series, constructing, but also being strongly connected to academia has been quite beneficial. So I think I would go through two scales of projects, or two kind of actually. One is that we have been working quite a lot is the designing infrastructure, something that's not commonly known as a field for architects. And this is the 45-meter high corner pylon that was recently constructed, that means last summer, where the 36 tons of steel was raised and now is being there, and engineering and innovation wise. But I have to admit that the first design was quite strongly connected to another material that gave its blend and its smooth curvature, that was then taken and imitated with imitated with steel and steel ribs. And all of this, the geometry itself as well, was most minimal amount of sticks. As we know, in the wood joints, the biggest problems are inside of the joinery. So that's why it was really important to have it as minimal as possible. So that's how it is at the moment in the mid of Estonia. But happily enough, it has become a series of projects, meaning it has become a family that we're continuing with to have more of this infrastructure connected to design. And I also put a Boiling Grumman logo here because we are really strongly collaborating with them. And I think it's super important to realize how this has grown out of the diploma team that I once had, or the close collaboration with Klaus, but most of all, Adam, who has today, happy birthday, first of all, but also the fact that we are still in everyday life dealing with constructing and realizing projects together. And I think that's an amazing input that Angewandte has given. But in terms of context where I'm at and how I was sexualizing the knowledge, if that's a body of work, then it is strongly connected to the fact that Estonia has the biggest and most automated timber industry, consisting of 5-axis CNCs, etc. We also have we are the second largest emitter for two in European Union, and that's something that we really need to deal with also in scale of architecture and in construction. But the digitalization that has been often labeled on us that we are really advanced with this is not really reached the construction and architecture yet, but we are in a government level trying to push this and innovate with this. And of course, all those previous prototypes that we have constructed and the geometrical research that we have done is something that generates the body of work. So I think the second part of this, what I would like to show, is also the fact that there's been a constant search for the building component. But in order to reach that, or in order to understand that, it was really necessary to take apart the production chain for architecture and realize that the architect should not be there only in the first phase, but it should be there in all the phases. So really creating a system that is able to go from the first sketch to the end of construction. And I think that's another project of ours, but that's where I'm trying to draft the sequence of works, how we deal with the element and the overall body simultaneously in an algorithmic system. But looking for this one component, I think that has been really essential in all the fields that we're working on. So I mean, in running studios, but also constructing installations, because in the beginning we dealt a lot with installations. This is our student work, for example, dealing with creating their own logic or spatial logic, and then also constructing them in a smaller scale models. But then in the second semester, dealing with a large scale project. So we're really in between of multiple scales simultaneously. But most important is to figure out the components where it all starts from. But in example of our work would be the components that at the bus station that I'm going to show you is dealing with is actually the leftovers timber house manufacturers. This is the biggest CLT producer in Estonia that is constantly about up to 10% of all the material that they use are actually like cutoffs and cutoffs of doors and windows that we try to then make a new building block out of. And this, and then combining them and creating a certain kind of repetition that that we could continue going towards circular economy in architecture, zero waste methodology, and also upcycling the leftovers, where this project that we constructed for the my PhD in defense was something that is now being constructed in multiple smaller in Estonia. But this is not the only scale we deal with. The other scale is how to use the same ideas and methodologies of like the zero waste idea, local renewable material in 100 years later, going from apartment buildings that were really common in Estonia, like up to 85% of all of them constructed in the early 20th century actually dealt with constructed them out of timber, like how we would do it today and how would it look like today in terms of new modality, new regular a model that we finalized few weeks ago. It's in Estonian Architecture Museum at the moment. That is proposing a new way of living together in a spiral method. Instead of buying square meters, you buy a lineage of a building, and you have multiple story height apartments in it. But all of this has fed into various of projects in various scales that are, some are under construction at the moment. The apartment building is a research project. So this is basically the ways how from part to whole and whole to part has been the way of how to going from fancy rather to what I consider architecture. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sille.
Did you hear it all? Was it all visible?
Yeah, very good, excellent, fantastic. So yeah, it's late. I know we've
good.
This has been the most enjoyable 2-hour seminar I've ever been on, but I don't know how other people feel out there. But it's been really, really fascinating. I guess one thing I wanted to always ask you, because I saw you as a student and I've seen you as a co-teacher. Now I've seen your work from afar a little bit as a practitioner. How would you sort of, let's say for our students now, and anyone out there listening who's thinking about the way this discipline works, what do you think the correlation is between teaching and practice in your mind? I mean, how important is that? Obviously, it's very important to you, but how do you justify it in your head that that you spend time generously with students, as I do, as we all do here, but at the same time are obviously battling the industry and the future of architecture, because quite frankly, some of your timber work is beginning to look like the future that is very, very much viable and very much very beautiful. Any thoughts on the kind of crossover between teaching and practice that you want to just sort of mention quickly? Oh, we lost you.
No, I have to admit that I've learned so much from it. Sorry, do you hear me?
I think you said you have to learn. You admitted you learned so much from me.
You hear me, right?
No,
yeah, almost. Honey, I learned so much from you.
Okay.
But I also learned a lot from my students.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that I didn't realize in the beginning, that this could be so. But the more I let them to continue with my own research and reflect, they're like constantly mirror around him, reflecting ideas in a sort of a tweaked way would have come on, and I think is a really essential part of our research as well. So we have started the research group, and we're also picking the ideas from there, and also in our office. I think, I mean, as they said, you're training you're teaching your own future employees, and I think that's also something that we can't find any workers currently in the practice field who has this knowledge that is necessary to construct those things. So I have to admit that sometimes I do feel that there's too little time for practice and too much in academia. But the hope is going in a direction that more I can focus on the research, and the research is something that my studios are about. Then actually it's more blurred. It's a fuzzy front. It's a fuzzy end. You don't know where one starts and the other one ends. So basically, I think this fuzziness is constant and super necessary in creative work.
Well, it's funny. You reminded me a little bit of why I fell in love with architecture, why I became an architect, and why I'm so interested in teaching as well as practicing, because I'm sitting here right now in near Urbino here in Italy, and I'm constantly reminded when I see the city of Urbino 10K out the window here about a city that was built in the early Renaissance by this incredible synergy between apprentice and master, between people who came to study with certain painters, artists, Raphael, Piero Francesco, and then in fact became themselves very important artists, because the hunger to learn and the ability to be an apprentice and to understand what it means to work under somebody, and that's what I find so fascinating about your teaching work, is gold. And it's amazing when you have students who don't quite understand that, and you can always tell the difference between those who are deeply invested in learning by any means, and then in fact continue on their own to become great teachers and great masters. So I think if there's one thing that holds all five of you together today, it's that. It's been absolutely fascinating to go back in time a little bit, but to go into the future with the five of you. It's been interesting how you all have very different trajectories, and that I find absolutely fascinating and amazing. And in every facet of our discipline, from the business side of things and how to unravel that, to the high-end research side of things, to the practical application of things, to the actual making of quite beautiful buildings and ideas. I'm going to open the floor quickly to questions. I know we're very late here. For those of you who, I'm also in the European time zone, who are missing dinner as I am, but I'm more than happy. I think we can continue the conversation if there are any important questions, anything you'd like to ask out there. We can also close it up. If not, it's no big deal. But anyone like to ask anything, or any of you like to ask any of the others anything? Anything at all out there? Feel free to pipe up now. We will unmute you. Not something you can do in a real audience though, right? Can you imagine you're in a hall and you can unmute people or mute them if you don't like what they're saying? All right. Well, I guess I
have a question.
Lenka.
Hi, Annie. How I would like to ask you, how do you see the evolvement of the students over the years? I mean, for me as well, it's already 4 years to be out of the university, and I think there is a big change in the projects as well and the trajectories, how people approach the design. So how is it for you, the work with the new generation?
Well, it's funny because when Greg and I taught at Columbia University ages ago, I mean, literally decades ago, I remember once being asked, what will work be like in 20 years from now? And how will the digital technology change architecture? And I said in an interview then, I think I showed it to some of our students and this year in a video clip that was found, that basically I always said, you know, we are at the very, very early stages of a massive seismic shift in what it means to be an architect and how we will learn and make and teach architecture. And it's not, and I said in the long picture, and that's why I mentioned Urbino here, is that the Renaissance basically was kind of the birth of modernism. And so we've had 500 years. So you can imagine the early Renaissance architects working in gold, in sort of metal smithing and painting and working on structures and so on, who are at the very beginning of where we've come after a long, and then you show these crazy tall buildings. And in some ways, those to me are the brackets of what started in this town, Urbino, here on the Adriatic coast, over 500 years ago in the Western Renaissance, at least on this side of the equation. So having said that, I've watched a progression that's almost fractal or algorithmic in terms of its frequency of change over these last 20 years, 30 years since we first started using computers in this discipline. And it's changing now dramatically and under shorter time spans and shorter clips. What took 10 years took then 5. What's taken 5 is taking 2.5, and so on. And that asymptotic trajectory of sort of history is really kind of fascinating, because things are changing. Interests are changing dramatically. There's a lot more interest today, of course, in the world we live in the environments we create, and the materials we use, and in the way we are as human beings. But the one thing that's interesting is that underlying that are things that haven't changed. There are certain classical, I don't mean just classical architecture, but there are certain sort of staples to our discipline and to practicing and to being an architect and to thinking about architecture that's always there underneath this seismic change and shifts that are taking place. So the short answer is, the students are evolving. And I sometimes have to think, and I've seen it this semester, even just this semester, and I can see Sarah and Raphael are on this call on this. I can see a few other names here. There has been a kind of learning that is rapidly from you guys. In other words, as students come in, they look at the other work, they look at the body of work that our studio has created and the discipline as a whole is created and the school is looking at, and then build on that very quickly. So the learning curve is very fast. It's kind of a hockey stick line, I guess. And that's kind of fascinating. And that means that I think we're going to see, and that's why I was interested in asking you guys a little bit about your futures, and then hearing things like the fact that you're going to find investors, or you're going to work together on a Bitcoin tower, or whatever it is you're looking at in the future, is that, yeah, you probably will. And it'll move fast. And I think Vicki one day will build her drone cloud cities, or at least will continue on that trajectory, because every day, there are remarkable shifts in technology and the way we perceive the world. And one of the reasons why the Renaissance is still interesting to me is because that was a seismic shift by virtue of the way we perceived the world, right? We saw the world so differently, literally overnight. I mean, it wasn't overnight, but from Chambui to Giotto to the Renaissance. And we're in that early stages of a similar kind of trajectory. So yeah, but it's also changes that aren't necessarily perceptible immediately. And I think that's what you guys are talking about and showing today is the way you're shifting the ground by virtue of the way you're practicing and thinking. So it's fascinating. So as was said by Sille very profoundly, that yeah, you learn a lot from your students. And I can add to that now, you learn a lot from your students who become architects, because it's fascinating to watch what the way the field progresses. I also think, by the way, I love what I heard about collaboration and the generosity and spirit of sharing ideas and tapping each other. That's a very different thing generationally than my generation. And one of the problems that we had generationally is that there wasn't enough open source thinking and sharing of ideas. And the generation ahead of us, the older generation to me, like Wolf and Zaha and Tom and others, we're very, very, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, but it was very insular and very competitive. So we've seen a degradation of that competitive individualism to a much more open landscape of exchange, which I think is amazingly important for this discipline. Not to mention the fact that, and it was not by design, but Lizanne laughed when I showed her the list. She said, aren't you going to have any men on this thing? I said, that's ironic because usually it's the other way around, right? There's always there's all these men standing on stage talking, and you're like, and Lizanne has generationally been part of that, right? To find herself on a panel as a woman architect. So that's another fantastic shift in the landscape that's healthy, vital, critical, in the way the world is seen, the way you guys are creating the world of the future. So thank you for the question. I didn't want to grandstand. I didn't mean to, this wasn't about me at all. It's about you guys. So anything else? Anyone want to ask any of you? Don't ask me any more questions. All right. I guess we'll close it up here. Thank you so much.
Hani, I want to thank you. Yeah, I wanted to thank you for organizing this. I think that was really helpful and necessary to see what the others are doing and how we have evolved in various directions. So thanks a lot for putting this together.
We batted around ideas for the festival lecture, the festival panels, and I said, look, there's no better panel to have than have just a selection of alumni come back and talk to us and talk to each other. I'd love to do it again. There's a whole nother, any alumni out there who weren't on this panel, there's a whole nother talk right that I could have. There's been a number of you, but you guys were great. Okay.
Would I just add one thing? Again, thank you so much, Hani. And if I could say, it was so amazing to see everybody's work. And I think that the core skill that everybody extracted from the studio is just being observant and critical. And it's a skill set, I think, that you can transfer to so many different fields. So this is really amazing.
Yeah, no, again, I am so impressed by the different roads you are all taking. And I kind of, if there's one thing I'm proud of as a teacher, I think all of the co-teachers here are also probably proud of, is the fact that you guys have been able to branch into so many different directions, that we haven't turned out a bunch of clones or a bunch of disciples or a bunch of sort of, people who are just kind of imitating a style or a work. No, on the contrary, you're all very original, and that's why also I want the 5 of you to speak today, because of your the originality and that was the other thing that was fascinating across the board, by the way. Very no discussion on sort of trends or of following any kind of sort of flavor of the month strategies. It was all original work, and it's continuing to be. That's really great. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap it up here, unless we're okay. All right, good.
Thanks so much.
Okay, it's
thank you.
Wonderful to see you all.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully we'll see you all in somewhere in person sometime soon. Stay well, stay healthy.